I can't stand my life. My wife is a constant source of criticism, and my daughter mirrors her perfectly. My son, sharp and perceptive, couldn't bear the dysfunction and bolted the moment he turned 18. He saw the mess that was our household and made the smart choice to leave. My daughter, however, seemed to idolize her mother's ways and has been following in her footsteps ever since. I genuinely feel sorry for the man she married. In hindsight, I should have seen the red flags long before our first wedding anniversary. Ella was always convinced she was more attractive than she really was. She had a habit of flirting with other men, likely to boost her own ego, but the flirting was never the end of it. Somehow, in her distorted logic, she justified sleeping around as long as she believed I wasn't aware of it. The cruel irony? I always knew. For 26 long years, I've known, and for 26 long years, I've stayed silent. It's no wonder my son decided to leave. The question I keep asking myself is why I didn't leave. Why didn't I put an end to it? I don't have a clear answer. I didn't approve of her behavior, not by a long shot, but I suppose I got complacent. She cooked my meals, cleaned the house, and never refused intimacy. In fact, she often initiated it. Sure, she was a nag and an insufferable one at that, but over time, I learned to tune her out. I convinced myself that leaving wasn't worth the trouble, that no better option existed for me. I'm nothing special, a middle-aged man with thinning hair, bifocals, and an extra 20 pounds of belly fat. My job is uninspiring, a dead-end position I've held for 26 years. Each year, younger, more driven colleagues surpass me. I'm essentially just working to pay the bills. There are no savings, no real retirement plans, and the only insurance we have comes through my job. We've never owned a house, just rented one from Ella's brother, which only adds to my sense of inadequacy. Looking at my life, it's hard to find any glimmer of hope. Ella, on the other hand, has aged gracefully. She's disciplined about her workouts and keeps her figure in check. I suppose she has to if she wants to keep catching the attention of other men. To her credit, she's discreet about her affairs. It's usually one man at a time, maybe two a year. Whether she ended things or they lost interest, I never bothered to find out. At least she kept her affairs out of our home, which for some reason was enough for me. As for me, I never sought anything outside our marriage. A few opportunities came my way over the years, but I always brushed them off. It felt like too much effort, and I never saw the point. My daughter Riley married a man without much backbone, probably because he reminded her of me. They had twin girls shortly after the wedding, adorable kids, but I can't help but think they're destined to grow up just like their mother and grandmother. It's heartbreaking to watch. Even now, there are glimpses of it. Their bossy nature, their constant demands for attention. It's like witnessing a slow-moving train wreck. At work, the only things that brighten my day are Natalie, my secretary, and Lucas, the mail clerk. Technically, Natalie isn't just my secretary. She manages tasks for 6 of us in the office. But I've always felt she goes the extra mile for me. Lucas, on the other hand, is this cheerful young guy who never seems to have a bad day. I have no idea what his future plans are, but his upbeat attitude is something I've grown to appreciate. Natalie and Lucas share a great rapport, often joking and gossiping together. I find myself looking forward to being at work more than going home. After 13 years of working with Natalie, I still don't know much about her personal life, other than the fact she's single and seems to despise my wife. I've never asked why, and frankly, I'm not sure I want to know. Then, out of nowhere, Riley showed up at my office one day, brimming with excitement. She announced that she'd signed her twins up for a scoliosis research study. Both girls, it turns out, have slight spinal curvatures. Riley explained that scoliosis can have genetic factors and can sometimes lead to serious complications, like heart problems. As part of the study, they needed genetic samples from family members. She handed me a padded envelope containing a small plastic bottle and instructions to spit into it and seal it. I always thought these things were done with cotton swabs, but apparently spitting works too. The envelope was prepaid and addressed. All I had to do was follow the instructions. Riley thanked me, smiled, and left me sitting there, holding the strange little bottle and wondering if this study might reveal more than any of us were prepared for. "What did the devil's spawn want this time?" Natalie asked, setting a steaming cup of coffee on my desk. Her tone feigned helpfulness, but her intent to dig up gossip was unmistakable. "She enrolled the twins in some scoliosis study," I replied, trying to sound indifferent. "They need my DNA for it." And, Natalie, maybe you should ease up on the harsh comments about my wife. Natalie raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. Didn't you do one of those DNA tests a few years ago? Yeah, it was through the company's medical program, I admitted. So why isn't that good enough? She asked, leaning closer, clearly intrigued. They don't know about it. That test was for me. I wanted to confirm the kids were mine before updating my will, I said matter-of-factly. Her face lit up with amusement, a mischievous smile creeping across her lips. Insulting Ella was a sport she seemed to thoroughly enjoy. Well, don't leave me hanging. Are they yours? Yes, Riley and Mason are both mine, I said flatly. Not much else to say about it. Some people have all the luck, she quipped with a smirk. Maybe you should try your hand at the lottery. Mason was never the issue, I replied, shaking my head. He just got fed up with the chaos at home and angry at me for not fixing it. And, Natalie, I really mean it. Quit trashing Ella all the time. Her smirk deepened. Can't make any promises, boss. She just makes it too easy. Anyway, are you going to spit in the bottle or what? I laughed, despite myself. It's not a urine test, Natalie. They want saliva, not that it makes much of a difference. At that moment, Lucas strolled in with the day's mail and a cheerful greeting. Natalie's eyes gleamed with a mischievous idea. Lucas, sweetie, you're just in time, she teased. Evan needs you to spit in this bottle for him. Lucas froze, wide-eyed, as did I. But then a thought occurred to me. This study wasn't important enough for me to care deeply about the results. Why not? I handed the bottle to Lucas, who hesitated but eventually complied. Natalie and I watched as he carefully filled it. You sure about this? Lucas asked, examining the label that clearly read Evan Hudson. I don't mind, as long as it doesn't come back to bite me. Don't worry, I assured him. Natalie and I will make sure you stay out of trouble. Natalie sealed the sample in the envelope with an air of triumph. I'll make sure this gets mailed today, boss, she said, with a grin that stretched ear to ear as she left. Lucas lingered, still looking unsure. You know, she's got a thing for you, he said suddenly, lowering his voice like he was letting me in on a secret. I blinked. Excuse me? He shrugged. I've noticed the way she looks at you when you're not paying attention. She's even told me she wishes you weren't married. The comment left me rattled and oddly pleased. I had always seen Natalie as nothing more than a colleague, a friend. But hearing this stirred something unexpected. She certainly treated me better than Ella ever had. For the first time, I began to wonder if I'd been overlooking something significant. Thanks, Lucas. I'll see you later, I said, my mind preoccupied. Over the following weeks, Lucas's words echoed in my head, and I started paying closer attention to Natalie. Her smiles seemed warmer, her gestures more thoughtful, and our conversations carried a new spark. For the first time in years, I felt noticed, appreciated even. Divorce, a thought I'd long dismissed, suddenly didn't seem so far-fetched. Natalie's kindness was a stark contrast to Ella's coldness, and I found myself drawn to her more and more. On Fridays, I had a habit of sneaking out of work early, a routine I'd established years ago. That afternoon, I settled into my recliner at home, relishing the rare quiet. But soon, voices from the kitchen broke the peace. Ella and Riley were arguing, unaware I was home. Though I tried not to eavesdrop, snippets of their heated exchange reached my ears. No, Riley, I have no idea who it could be. I was sure it was your father, Ella said, her tone defensive. My father? Riley shot back, her voice sharp. Mom, this isn't my father. She must have been holding the DNA results. I don't even know who my real father is. And you, my own mother, don't know either? A chill ran through me, colder than anything I'd felt before. Could this really be happening? The argument between Ella and Riley was a chaotic blend of overlapping voices, but I managed to catch the gist of it. They can't even match this DNA sample to anything, Riley said, her frustration cutting through the noise. It doesn't show up in any database. If you can't help me figure this out, who can? I couldn't help but savor the sight of my daughter calling Ella out. It felt like karmic payback for all the years I'd watched Ella manipulate and dominate everyone around her. I tried to pick up on as much as I could, but their voices dropped to hushed murmurs after a while. I caught mention of another test scheduled for Tuesday morning before Riley stormed out, slamming the front door. For now, I wasn't ready to address the situation or reveal the truth, but I relished the small victory of seeing Ella squirm. It was easily the highlight of my week, and I could already picture Natalie's reaction when I told her about it on Monday. She'd be thrilled, no doubt. The only downside was having to wait a couple of days to share the story. That evening, after dinner, Ella announced she was going to visit a friend dealing with personal problems. She told me not to wait up and didn't know when she'd be back. Of course, I doubted her excuse. It seemed far more likely she was meeting someone else. Strangely, I didn't care. It gave me the perfect excuse to pay Natalie a visit. When I arrived at her place, Natalie answered the door, looking surprised. "Evan, what are you doing here? You should have called first. I look like a mess." "Sorry, I couldn't help myself. I figured you'd want to hear how your little DNA trick played out," I said. Even in casual sweatpants and a pullover, Natalie looked great. Seeing her without makeup for the first time only made her seem more genuine. And to my surprise, I found her even more attractive. "Want coffee or a beer?" she asked, motioning toward the kitchen. "I'll take a beer, but if I have more than 3, I'll be sleeping on your couch," Natalie smirked. "Don't worry, I've got a bed big enough for that." Her playful tone wasn't lost on me. She was flirting, and though it caught me off guard, I didn't mind. I'd originally come over just to share the drama from earlier, but now Natalie's intentions were clear. We started chatting about the DNA test, laughing over the absurdity of it all, but the conversation gradually shifted to work, life, and everything in between. 3 beers in, I realized I couldn't drive home. Natalie insisted I stay, and before I knew it, we were in her bedroom. What followed was a night of passion I hadn't experienced in years. The next morning, I returned home feeling lighter than I had in a long time. Ella was still asleep when I crashed on the couch. It wasn't long before she came downstairs and shook me awake. "What are you doing down here? Go upstairs, take a shower, and sleep off your hangover," she said dismissively. "And if you're going to go out drinking, at least learn how to handle it." She didn't even consider the possibility that I'd been with another woman. To her, I was just a hapless husband who'd stumbled home drunk. The thought struck me as amusing, and I realized I might be seeing Natalie again soon. That Saturday, I busied myself with chores, mowing the lawn, washing the car, feeling strangely at peace. It was like a weight had been lifted. For the first time, I could clearly envision a life without Ella's constant nagging and control. I could also picture a future with Natalie, someone who made me feel valued. One thing was certain: the next time I visited her, I'd stick to just 2 beers. The weekend dragged, but Monday eventually arrived. Natalie greeted me with her usual warmth, though her smile seemed brighter than usual. We agreed to keep things professional at work, and for the most part, it worked. That is, until Lucas walked in. Somehow, he instantly picked up on the change. He didn't say a word, just stood there with a knowing grin. Natalie and I exchanged a glance, unable to hide our amusement, and that was all the confirmation he needed. Lucas walked away with a spring in his step, clearly delighted by whatever he'd inferred. As for the rest of the office, they remained blissfully unaware, for now. From Riley and Ella's heated argument, it was clear that something significant was brewing for Tuesday morning. Natalie, ever resourceful, had already convinced Lucas to spit into one of those tiny cups from the office water dispenser. I'd stashed it in the top left drawer of my desk, using the edges to fashion a makeshift funnel. Something told me it might prove useful. At around 10 o'clock, Ella unexpectedly showed up at my office. Or, at least she thought it was unexpected. Natalie escorted her in with her usual professional demeanor, leaving the door slightly ajar. "Evan, there's an issue with the DNA sample you gave Riley a couple of weeks ago," Ella began, settling into the chair across from me. "She needs a new one, so I brought another kit. Would you mind?" "Not at all," I replied casually, keeping my expression neutral. "What went wrong with the last one? It didn't seem that complicated." "I'm not sure," she said, sounding exasperated. "Apparently the sample got contaminated and couldn't be processed. This time it'll just take a second." She handed me the new bottle, her eyes expectant. Just then, Natalie popped her head into the room. "Ella, do you have your parking ticket? I can validate it for you," she offered, her tone polite but perfectly timed. Distracted, Ella began rummaging through her purse. Seizing the opportunity, I grabbed the cup from my drawer and quickly poured its contents into the bottle. As Ella turned back toward me, I raised the bottle to my lips, miming a quick spit before snapping the cap on with a practiced motion. "All set," I said, handing it back to her with a calm smile. Natalie handed over the parking ticket with a cheery, "Here you go," and stepped back to her desk, leaving Ella none the wiser. Satisfied, Ella sealed the bottle in a pre-labeled envelope and left shortly after. The inside of my desk drawer was a mess, but the look of sheer amusement Natalie and I shared made the chaos worthwhile. We spent the rest of the day chuckling over it, and she didn't even mind helping me clean up. Over the following weeks, Natalie and I grew closer, meeting up more often but keeping things discreet. Our evenings didn't always involve intimacy. Sometimes we just talked or watched a movie. Still, when we were together that way, it was like rediscovering a part of myself I thought had long faded. I kept up appearances at home, letting Ella believe I was spending my nights drinking at bars. It made things easier, and I always downed a couple of beers before heading home to keep the illusion intact. One Wednesday morning, my son-in-law, Sean Wallace, showed up at my office, looking like he was at the end of his rope. "Evan, I need your help," he said, his voice strained. "I'm losing my mind. Riley and your wife are constantly at each other's throats, and it's turned the house into a war zone." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean, Sean? What's going on?" Sean hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. We didn't have the kind of relationship where he could confide in me easily, so I gave him space to speak. "It's about the DNA tests for the scoliosis study," he finally said. "They've been arguing nonstop. Honestly, I'm grateful I'm at work most of the day because home is unbearable." "Can you explain in more detail?" I asked, flipping on the intercom subtly so Natalie could listen in. Sean sighed and continued. "Apparently, none of the DNA samples you provided match Riley's or the twins. She's completely shaken. Riley's always believed you were her biological father, but now she's questioning everything. I'm sorry if I'm overstepping here, Mr. Hudson, but I thought you might already know." Leaning back in my chair, I feigned a thoughtful expression. "No, Sean, you're not overstepping. To be honest, I've had my own doubts over the years," I said smoothly, layering just enough sincerity into my voice to sell the lie. Sean fidgeted, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Riley even forced Ella to track down and collect DNA samples from 3 other men. None of them matched either. She's been losing her mind ever since, accusing Ella of sleeping around so much that she doesn't even know who fathered her. Ella was in tears the other day." I nodded slowly as though digesting the information. Inside, however, I was reveling in the chaos, savoring the unraveling of Ella's carefully constructed facade. It was almost too satisfying to watch. "I have to agree, Sean, that sounds pretty rough," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Do you know who the 3 men are that she got DNA samples from?" Sean nodded, pulling a slip of paper from a folder and handing it over. I glanced at it and immediately recognized 2 of the names. "The worst part, Mr. Hudson," Sean continued, his frustration palpable, "is that Riley never asked me to provide a sample for those tests. But somehow, the papers I've seen claim my DNA says I'm the father of the twins. I never gave a sample. Something doesn't add up." I had to bite back a laugh at the sheer irony of it all. Here I was, orchestrating a lie about Riley's parentage, while Riley herself was hiding the fact that Sean wasn't the twins' biological father. My daughter had clearly inherited her mother's knack for deceit, and in some ways, she'd even surpassed her. I felt a pang of sympathy for Sean, but honestly, he was just rowing the same miserable boat I'd been stuck in for years. "Sean," I asked, leaning forward, "are you happy in your marriage to my daughter?" He hesitated, his discomfort obvious, before letting out a heavy sigh. "Honestly, sir, no. I think I made a huge mistake, but I don't know how to fix it." I met his gaze, my expression serious. "Look at me, Sean. I made the same mistake 26 years ago, and I did nothing about it. Is that how you want to end up?" He didn't answer, though the look in his eyes told me he knew the truth. He just didn't want to say it out loud. "So," I asked after a moment of silence, "what do you want from me?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe nothing. I just needed someone to talk to. You've always seemed reasonable, and if you have any advice, I'd appreciate it." I leaned back, considering my words carefully. Then, leaning over my desk, I met his gaze again. "Run, Sean. Run." He blinked, startled at first, but then his expression softened into a sad smile. We shook hands, and as he left, I could see him wrestling with my words. Something told me I wouldn't be seeing Sean Wallace for a while. I wished him luck. He'd need it. No sooner had Sean stepped out than Natalie stormed in, her eyes blazing. "Evan Hudson, you're the biggest hypocrite I've ever met," she declared, her voice cutting. "How can you give that kind of advice to your son-in-law when you won't even follow it yourself?" She was right, of course, and I couldn't deny it. You're right, Natalie, I admitted with a resigned sigh. I just wish I'd had someone like me to talk to back then. Well, you've got me now, she said firmly. And I'm telling you the same thing you told Sean. Run. I've watched you for 13 years, Evan, and I've never understood why you let Ella walk all over you. If you're going to do something about it, now's the time. You have 1 week to decide, or I'm out. With that, she turned on her heel and slammed the door behind her, something she'd never done before. I could tell she meant every word. I sat there staring at the list Sean had given me. Owen Simmons and Gavin Chapman, both longtime family friends, or so I'd thought. Clearly they were more friends of Ella's than mine. The third name, Dylan Porter, was a complete mystery. I had no clue who he was. A few minutes later, Natalie returned, calmer now, with a fresh cup of coffee. She didn't apologize for her outburst, but at least she wasn't giving me a hard time anymore. One nagging woman in my life was enough. Okay, Evan, who are the guys on the list Sean gave you? She asked, sitting across from me. I slid the paper over. 2 of them are family friends. The third, I've got no idea. So, what are you going to do about it? She asked, her eyebrow arching in challenge. Would it bother you if I said nothing? I replied, testing the waters. Her expression hardened. Yeah, it would. I'm not saying you need to go on some revenge spree, but you do need to get off your butt and take action. After 13 years, you finally noticed me, and I'm not letting you slide backward. If you don't do something, I will. Dinner that evening was tense. Ella seemed preoccupied, but she didn't say much, which was honestly a relief. I'd take the awkward silence over one of her usual snide remarks any day. When I excused myself to go to the bar, she didn't even bother with her typical sarcastic comments. This time, though, I actually went to the bar, and I drank. Harder than I had in years. By the time I stumbled back home, I was more drunk than I'd been in ages, but for once, it felt good. For the first time in a long time, I felt like change was on the horizon. The next morning at work started off as usual, until Lucas walked in. He dropped the mail on Natalie's desk, and then came into my office, handing me a brochure. I gave him a curious look, prompting an explanation. I gave one to Natalie, too, he said with a smirk. Since you both love to travel, I thought this might interest you. After he left, I couldn't help but laugh when I saw the pamphlet. It was for a 4-week course to earn a commercial driver's license, CDL, for tractor trailers. Moments later, Natalie strolled in, holding the same brochure and chuckling. Where does Lucas come up with these ideas? I asked, shaking my head. Hey, don't knock it, Natalie replied. I think it's kind of intriguing. I gave her a skeptical look. You're kidding, right? I can't see either of us doing this, let alone both of us. She grinned mischievously. Oh, I can picture it. I bet I'd look great in jeans. You do, I admitted. But what does that have to do with anything? She laughed. Well, you can't exactly drive a big rig in a skirt, can you? Our lighthearted banter continued for nearly an hour, and somehow she wore me down. By the end of the day, we had taken the afternoon off, and 2 hours later, we were enrolled at the Keystone Drivers School. Between vacation and sick days, we had enough time saved up to cover the course without jeopardizing our jobs, just in case things didn't pan out. That evening at home was anything but peaceful. Sean had finally left Riley, heading off to who knows where, and I couldn't help but feel proud of him for taking that step. Ella, however, seemed convinced I had something to do with Sean's departure. I neither confirmed nor denied it. Instead, I slipped out under the pretense of going to the bar, but ended up at Natalie's place. By the time I returned home, Ella was already asleep. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparations. Natalie trained a temp to cover her duties for the next month, while I rearranged my workload to ensure nothing fell through the cracks during my absence. Natalie also took it upon herself to book me an appointment with a divorce lawyer, and made sure I went by personally driving me there. The lawyer asked for the names Sean had given me, which I provided. I informed Ella I'd be working out of the office for the next few weeks, and she didn't seem to care either way. The school was conveniently close, so the daily commute was easy. One night, however, a severe storm rolled in, and instead of driving home, Natalie and I ended up sharing a motel room for the first time. The 4 weeks flew by. I turned out to be a natural at driving, while Natalie excelled at backing up and parking. We both earned our CDL and even received job offers from a few major trucking companies. To celebrate, we took Lucas out for dinner at the Outback Steakhouse. Spending time with Natalie only reinforced how much I enjoyed her company. It was refreshing to finally experience what real companionship felt like, and I found myself wondering why I hadn't made changes in my life sooner. That night, during dinner, I couldn't resist stirring the pot. I casually asked Ella how the scoliosis study was progressing. Instead of the explosive reaction I expected, she stood up quietly and left the room without a word. An hour later, she returned, announced she had to visit a sick friend, and walked out the door. Taking the hint, I decided it was only fair to visit a friend of my own. A week later, Natalie and I started working as drivers for one of the largest freight haulers in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. I left home quietly, packing my things without a confrontation. The divorce papers were delivered the following day. I moved in with Natalie, and Lucas was more than happy to house sit for me in exchange for free rent. Life with Natalie felt easy and natural, and to my surprise, we never got on each other's nerves. I was sure disagreements would arise eventually, but for now, everything was smooth. Kids weren't in our plans, but if that ever changed, I just hoped they wouldn't inherit scoliosis. As for Sean, he disappeared completely. Riley had no choice but to move back in with Ella, and from what I heard, their relationship was as tumultuous as ever. A few months later, Natalie and I stopped in Colorado to visit Mason. We got along better than ever, and it was clear he was proud that I'd finally taken charge of my life. He and Natalie clicked instantly, and before we left, Mason promised that when he went home for Christmas, he'd finally tell Ella and Riley the truth about the DNA tests. For the first time in years, it felt like everything was finally falling into place. Thank you for watching, and hope to see you soon. Have a great day.